tonight is part of our Pass the Baton series, in which each semester one acclaimed author selects another creative practitioner of their choice to talk to. And then the following semester, the baton passes to that chosen artist to choose their own interlocutor, and so on. Previously, Charlie Gilmour was selected by the journalist and writer Helen Lewis, and tonight it's Charlie's turn, and he's going to be interviewing the essayist and novelist C.J. Hauser. Charlie will introduce tonight's event in a minute, so I just want to take this opportunity to welcome you virtually to NCLA's online space and to let you know what we've got coming up later this semester. So next week, on Thursday, the 28th of October, we've got the prize giving and the reading for the James Berry Poetry Prize, which was a prize inaugurated by NCLA this year to assist emerging poets of colour. The following week, on Wednesday, the 3rd of November, we have two writers who both practice in both prose and poetry, Caleb Classis and Jack Underwood, and they're going to be talking about their works that deal with the experience of fatherhood. A fortnight after that, on Wednesday, the 17th of November, the journalist and memoirist Hadley Freeman is going to be reading from and talking about her best-selling family memoir, House of Glass, the stories and secrets of a 20th century Jewish family. At the end of November, on Thursday, the 25th, we are hosting the Poetry Book Society Autumn Showcase, in which the poets Raymond Antrobus and Hannah Lowe will be reading from their latest collections. Then on the 1st of December, the novelist Omar El Akkad will be talking about his highly acclaimed recent novel, What Strange Paradise, described by the New York Times as an instant classic. And our final event of the semester is the novelist Sarah Moss, who will be reading from and discussing her novel, The Fell, which has been described by Waterstones as a blazing novel of the state of the nation during the pandemic. So there's a lot coming up, and all of these events are taking place online and completely free of charge. And we'd love to see you there. You do need to register in advance, so please do so at www.ncl.ac.uk/NCLA/events. So that brings us to tonight's event. Charlie Gilmour will introduce his speaker of choice, C.J. Hauser, but I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce you to Charlie. Charlie's wonderful memoir, Featherhood, was published last year, and it tells the story of how Charlie found a young magpie in a Bermondsey junkyard and saved it and reared it in his London flat. And in the book, the bird becomes a fulcrum for Charlie's contemplation of his difficult relationship with his biological father and for his own feelings about becoming a father himself. Featherhood is a startling, tender, clever book with a distinctive and thoughtful voice. And as anyone who attended his event with Helen Lewis will know, Charlie is a distinctive and thoughtful speaker, and we're in for a real treat tonight as he enters into conversation with his chosen writer, C.J. Hauser. So now I'll hand over to you, Charlie, to introduce C.J. and tonight's event.
Well, thank you, Rachel, for that. Am I on? Hello? Oh my God. Has this gone wrong?
You're good, we're here.
Okay. Oh my God. Okay. I was about to say you've really put the pressure on to make this a wonderful, I balls to that right at the beginning, but no, thank you for that wonderful introduction. It's my absolute pleasure to introduce C.J. Hauser. C.J. is the author of two brilliant novels, The From Aways and Family of Origin. She also writes nonfiction. One of her essays, The Crane Wife, became a viral sensation that reached millions and sparked a bidding war for her forthcoming book, The Crane Wife, a Memoir and Essays, which is being published in the UK by Viking next July. And as well as all of this, she teaches creative writing and literature at Colgate University. Should I actually be calling you Professor Hauser?
No, I don't think that's necessary. The students seldom do, so I don't know why you should.
I sort of wanted to start at the beginning, really. You're an incredibly versatile writing. You know, you write fiction, you write non-fiction, you write these essays which sort of start as like, you know, literary analysis and then become these very deep personal essays. I'm thinking of your essay about Rebecca here. And I just wondered, sort of, where did it all begin? Were you one of those children that sort of sat in a corner secretly writing down things that people were saying without them knowing and making up stories about your family, or did it come later in life?
Oh no, I was absolutely that child. I really imprinted on Harriet the Spy, was one of my favorites when I was little. And I think I was pathologically shy. Like you couldn't make me make eye contact with anyone or speak to anyone who wasn't an animal for a long, long time. And there's something about having it all bottled up like that when you're small, where you're sort of an observer, that I think it does something to you. And I've always felt like a person who couldn't quite get across the things that I wanted to say in real life. And so it was sort of like please hold, I'll go to this room and in like a month I'll come out. And it's like, this is what I was trying to say. And sometimes that has the shape of a story and sometimes that has the shape of an essay. But it's that idea of, I want to get my thoughts right before I bring them to you, that maybe is at the root of it.
That's so interesting. So I often think of like when you see people who become photographers and their camera actually is a sort of a thing that they can put between themselves and the world to have some sort of control over it. And with writing, the camera is in your head. You know, you can constantly have this defense mechanism where you sort of put yourself in the writer's seat of the consciousness. And but sometimes do you find that gets in the way of actually living and experiencing your life?
Oh my God, what a question. Yeah, I think, what a good question. I think that I actually find that I never know, quite inconveniently, by the way, I never know that I'm going to write about things until I've already experienced them, which is nice because it means that I'm not in that position. If I go into a thing, knowing I'm going to write about it, I tend to freeze up. And I did that. Actually, there's an essay in the forthcoming collection about going to the DARPA robotics trials, where the American government tried to incentivize roboticists to make these like save you in a burning building kind of robots. And I went to write about it. And because I knew I was supposed to write about it, I was doing exactly what you were saying. And I was like in that mode the whole time. And it took me almost a decade to write the essay because I was so in my head about it. But other things like going to study the whooping crane, because when I'm there, I'm just sort of in the moment and living. I can think back on them later. And I think it's when I'm doing that sort of meaning making thinking where you sort of think back and you're sort of like, okay, what was this to me? That's when that part of my brain activates. So mercifully, it's not on all the time, but
Yeah.
like, and on the other hand, when I try to put it on purpose, it doesn't go well.
Interesting. I wanted to ask you about your forthcoming book. So it's the title is, and the title's changed a few times, hasn't it? It's sort of recently settled on The Crane Wife, a memoir in essays. And I'm not actually familiar. I've read a lot of memoir, like a lot of memoir, but I've not actually ever read a memoir and essays before. How does that work?
Well, I think we've made it up, but I think what we wanted to communicate, so they are essays, they're absolutely essays, and they're essays that are almost always half about my life and half about something else I'm obsessed with, which could be animals, robots, ghosts, art, all sorts of the X-Files, all sorts of things. But when I was putting together the book, I had a very particular reason why I wanted to write the book. And there's this sort of arc of an experience I think I've been on to do with, I don't know, thinking about what are the stories I was handed about what I thought my life was supposed to look like, or what are the stories I was sort of secretly measuring myself against when I'm like, oh, well, like you're doing XYZ, but if you were doing ABC, like that's what you should be doing. And the gap between those two things, if that sort of makes sense, caused massive unhappiness for me. And so the arc of the book is sort of looking at where did these stories come from, these expectations I had, like narratively even for my life. And then there's sort of a movement of trying to chuck them out and get rid of them, which I realize you can't totally do. And then there's sort of a movement towards trying to like create new stories, make peace with the old ones. So we've called it a memoir and essays because even though they're all individual pieces, they have this structure of like going on a journey that was really important to me because that's something I find so satisfying when I read nonfiction, and I wanted to sort of relate to readers in that way. I want to bother you though, because I feel like I do a lot of braiding, and I feel like you have braiding and featherhead as well, where you have these two strands that you're balancing. And I wonder sort of how you got to that place of being a fellow braided nonfiction person.
Well, it's kind of like, I mean, it's a good trick because, you know, it keeps people's attention if you've got like, you know, several different stories at once. I mean, to me, part of the power of a piece of writing is that it has a question at the center. And so it's a question that you're trying to answer, and also the reader is trying to answer. You know, it's, you know, why did the father disappear? You know, will this person ever be happy? Those sorts of things. And, you know, that sort of intertwining of interrelated questions and stories really, I think, can like multiply that effect. But yes, I wanted to talk about one of those essays which really sort of launched this whole thing, which was the Crane Wife, which a lot of people are watching have probably read because it was the sort of literary equivalent of a multi-platinum bestseller. You know, sort of on the Paris Review, and it's had millions of views, and people are still talking. It was, when was it? 2020? When was it? It was. Yeah, it was a few years ago, but people still talk about it. You know, I was just quickly searching on Twitter, and people are still being like, "Oh, today I thought about the Crane Wife. I think about it every day." I'm like, you know, it was this piece of writing that really went boom. And, you know, can you tell us a bit about that piece of writing and whether you expected it to sort of explode in the way that it did?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I actually, so I wrote that essay. It was, I'm sure many people listening know, and I know you know, that when you publish a novel, you're supposed to be like, but quick, tell some people who you actually are so they care enough to read something you made up. And it's like, but I spent all this time making the thing up. Why wouldn't they just read about my made up place? In any event, so you write about other things. And so I'm like, I'll write about the research I did for the book. And so I was writing about going to study the whooping crane so I could have the scientists in my novel be less bad at being scientists on the page. And I didn't want to offend. I have many scientists in my life here at Colgate University where I teach. And as I was writing it, there was like a kind of way a person is maybe expected to write such an essay. And it's like a neat thing where it's like, I had an experience, I learned a thing, and now everything is great. And I have written many things from spite in my life, and it's usually turned out to be quite a good motivator. And I sort of spite wrote this piece being like, I can't tie it up in a neat bow, and it didn't go well, and everything was really hard, and it didn't feel right, and this is what that experience was like. And I sort of, like a petulant child, like put it across the desk to my editor and my publicity team being like, this is what I wrote. And they were like, oh God. And then they were like, oh. And so we had this sort of moment of being like, you have given us a thing, and it's not the thing we had asked you for at all. So what will we do with it? And so I was so excited to publish it in the Paris Review. And I sort of thought it was just going to be this nice literary thing that meant a lot to me because that's a publication that I've read and respected for a long time. And I got to write the essay my way, and I didn't have to sort of tie it up in a neat bow that didn't feel right to me. And then it turned out that maybe there are kind of a lot of people where tying things up in a neat bow is not what they're relating to, I suppose is the right way to put it. So yeah, it was shocking and exciting and terrifying.
Yeah, I mean, you something quite rare happened to you, which is you went viral for doing something good.
I suppose that is quite rare. It was somewhat scary, actually. Since I've left Twitter. Twitter was like a place where I just sort of lurked in the margins and looked at people's cute animal pictures. And then all of a sudden I was like, oh no, and I fled because it just seemed like too high wire an act all of a sudden. And that's not kind of a way I'm comfortable being in the world. But it was so meaningful to me to see people talking about their own lives. Like, it wasn't the fact that they were talking about the thing I had written. It was that I had written a thing, and then people were saying what it meant to them as people and thinking about their lives. And it's like, of course, that's what you want. Like, as a writer, that's such a dream. And you mostly never find out if that happens or not on the other end of sort of the tin can telephone.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it was this, as well as being a beautiful piece of writing, it was, you know, there was so much serendipity at work, because you sort of go, if I can briefly sum up what the essay is about, people, you sort of go to watch, to sort of monitor the cranes, these endangered birds, just having, cancelled
A wedding.
your wedding, and you're sort of thinking, I shouldn't be going and doing this. I should be, crying at home, whatever. And, it turns out to be this fantastic trip. And while there, you also make this discovery of the myth of the crane wife. So it's these sort of perfect 3 stories. And that the discovery of the myth of the crane wife, which is it's sort of a paragraph in the middle, isn't it? But it's this perfect sort of linchpin that the whole thing swings on. And it's so convenient as well. I mean, it's sort of when you discovered that myth, was the writerly part of you like, yes, this is perfect, I can use this?
Do you know, I think I was so in the weeds of my own feelings at that point that to find, and by the way, so it turns out the Odd Bodkins version, which is the one that I sort of reference in the essay, is but one of many, many versions of the crane wife story, which is a thing I really love. And a lot of readers have written to me about oh, this is the one that's read the most in Japan, or this is the one that's read most in America, or this is the one. So there's so many permutations of it, and they're all fascinating to me in different ways. But in the moment when I encountered the folktale for the first time, it sort of felt like when you're sad in a particular way, especially breakup sad, it sort of feels like you're flipping through the television and every channel is telling you about your sadness, and you become deeply narcissistic for a moment, and everything feels like it's singing the same sad song at you. So it didn't even feel fortuitous. It just felt like, yep, this is just everything right now. Everything feels this way. But when I started 2 years later almost, when I went to write the essay, I was like, oh yeah, that's going in here. Of course that's going in here.
Yeah. Oh, so it was all still pretty fresh when you were writing about it as well. I think, 2 years is quite, the blood you're writing with is still quite warm.
Yes.
And when you were writing the rest of the essays, did after you had that hot burn of that one, were you sort of trying to analyze okay, this had beautiful writing, and it had this it's very relatable to lots of people? You're trying to replicate the success of that one, or do you just have to try and get on with writing the best essays you could?
No, again, because I'm sort of a petulant teenager forever in my heart. I was I'm going to write totally different things. I had this moment too, where I was I'm not going to write any more nonfiction. And of course, people in my life were but maybe you would. and I wanted to I took a while to think about it. I wanted to make sure I was not, a thing I do as a person that is not a great thing for me, that I didn't want to replicate as a writer, is someone's oh, we like that you did this. And I'm oh, I will be so good, and I will do the thing that you said was good and that you liked. And it's I wanted to actually be do I want to do this? How do I want to spend my time? What's my next writerly move? And so I started working on a novel. And then as I was working on it, I'd be oh, well, that's an essay I could write. And then I'd be working on the novel, and I'd be oh, I could also write about my grandmother and that other thing. And then eventually I said to my sort of literary crew in my life, I was I think I want to write this book in this way. And they were yeah, we know, we waited for you. We're glad you're here. But no, it was really for me about, it's that arc. And I'm okay, so if the crane wife is here, and it's this idea of, I had all these old stories inside of me, and this is a moment of crisis. I wanted to go back a little to be okay, where did the stories come from? How did I get here, in a sort of David Byrne way? And so there's one section that ends with the crane wife. And then the next section is very much trying to forensically unpack, what do I do with this? How do I escape this? And the third section is very much making peace and building new things.
This is hard taking the scalpel to yourself work, which, memoir, I think, always has to be, if it's going to be any good. But it's not easy work.
Yeah.
Do you find? You don't have to answer this at all, but I found that having therapy alongside that to be both helpful in helping you deal with all the emotions that come up, and quite useful in giving you insight into where you need to go next, what that story actually meant, remembering stuff that happened. Is that something that you have found useful? And no need to answer if you don't want to.
Oh no, absolutely. I think that it's this process of sitting at the desk, and there are things, of course, artistically that you're thinking oh, maybe the structure of this essay isn't working right, or maybe I need to think about I don't know, the voice in this piece. But more often than not, it's like there's something that I haven't figured out yet about life, and that is the thing that is blocking the essay. It's like, well, what am I supposed to do with that at my desk today? I just sat down to do a writing shift, and here I am being like, why did I make that decision? Where did that come from? And I sometimes when I got notes actually from, I have a very wonderful editor in the US who is also my editor for my novel Family of Origin, and I have a very wonderful new editor in the UK for the essays, and I'd be on the phone with them, and they would be like, oh, well, like, I think here you have to sort of accept that like you were doing this for this reason. And I'm like, do you accept my copay? Like, will you take my insurance? This is therapy. This is not, these are not edits. You are telling me what is up with me. And that balancing act is so new to me. It was not quite the same with the novel.
Yeah. Yes, because there's that distance there with novel. I mean, one of the things I found really very challenging when writing my memoir was this incredibly powerful feeling that I was doing something profoundly wrong. You know, because sort of, you know, from the playground onwards, you're taught that it's bad to tell tales. You know, snitches get stitches. Is that, do you have to sort of, do you have to mask, because a lot of the essays that I've read, you know, and any memoir, it doesn't involve just telling stories about you. It's the people in your life, it's your exes, it's there's a lot to overcome. And I was wondering, you know, is that something you find challenging, or are you a sort of natural telltale? And also, you know, how you actually approach the ethics of that, whether you felt like you needed to ask anyone permission, or were you just like, you know, fuck it, it's my life. If what's the Anne Lamott line? If you wanted people to write warmly about you, you should have behaved better.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been on sort of an ethical bender about it, and I have been harassing everyone who appears mostly. They've all read it, they've seen it, they've signed off, and by and large, the reaction has been really lovely, and lovely in the sense of like, and then we talked about things that were in the essays that we shared, and like that was a nice experience. And people being like, why are you asking me? Like, I don't, they're just yes. And they're like, do you want my full legal name? Do you want my social security number? I'm delighted to be in here. There are exes who I am not contacting because we do not talk anymore. And I feel complicated about that. And yet, I think that as sort of a rule, they all come off better than they did in real life. So I don't think they can be too mad with the portraits, but I guess we'll see. It's a thing that feels like I'm only telling the bits of the stories that I need to talk about my own life, and anything further afield than that, I've left out as best I can.
Yeah.
But it gives you the heebie-jeebies. And then in terms of like telling tales though, I come from Connecticut, which is a place that has a culture of like politeness and secrecy and good manners at dinner, and we do not talk about the things. And I think because I was raised that way, I find it very soothing and liberating just to have out with it. So I find it quite a relief to sort of write in this way and be like, can we just talk about that? Like, what would happen if we actually just talked about this? And I have that feeling, reading your book too, I have this feeling of like, we're never going to get anywhere if we don't sort of lay this out on the table so we can look at it. And I wonder if that process, like the process of writing it and organizing the book, mattered to you in that way.
I think I sort of feel similarly to what you were saying earlier, that like it is a way to work out your own feelings. And it's not therapy, you know, it's often, you know, the opposite of therapy. I mean, you get, when you write a memoir, you get asked quite a lot, oh, was this like therapeutic? And I sort of thought about what's behind that question. I think what they're asking about whether it's like an ethically produced book. Like, did a writer suffer in the production of this book? You know, there's sort of like, can I consume this without feeling guilty? It's like, no, the writer suffered. I'm afraid to tell you that. The writer did suffer, but it's okay. It was like, it was worth it, hopefully. I had another question about the ethics of memoir, which is about, you know, the truth. I mean, when you're writing memoir, you obviously can't just make things up for the sake of a good story. You have an obligation towards the truth, but you're still deploying all these creative writing skills. Scenes have to come alive, you need dialogue, you need to impose a narrative on a basically chaotic and meaningless universe. You know, where there's sort of moments when you were writing this, I'm going to call it a memoir, but this memoir and essays, where you felt a conflict between your role as storyteller and truth teller.
Yeah, do you know what? I feel like all the tools are on the table. I really do. I only worry about them in terms of the people I've actually written about. So I have an essay about a friend of mine, and I sent it to her and I was like, listen, like I've combined this trip that we did with this trip, and I put this conversation we had on your porch in the car on the way to this clinic that we're going to. And is that okay? And she was like, yeah, I don't remember anyway, like fine, whatever. And so things like that, as long as the person's okay with it, I think it's fine.
Yeah.
And then I also think it's good to sort of, I enjoyed sort of flagging for the reader these moments of creative play. So for example, there's a scene in the first essay of the book, Blood, where I'm telling all these family love stories. And one of them is about my great grandfather who shot a man who slept with his wife. And I write the dialogue in that scene. But of course, like there's no reader, and it's tagged with the time period. There's no reader who would think that I was alive in 1915, I hope, I think. And so when they see that dialogue and they see that tag, it's obviously an imagined scene that I've sort of put on its feet in that way. Or when an essay says, in college, I fell for a woman named Maggie while I was dating a boy I'll call Sam. And like by saying I'll call, it's like there's wiggle room here. Like I'm telling you a story. And so I think trusting the reader and sort of letting them in on the play feels like part of it for me.
Because it's kind of I sort of like that you say that, you know, you play around with chronology and sort of amalgam, because it's kind of the dark arts of memoir in a way. You know, I think a lot of readers really can maybe not like when they feel like things have been fudged together, in the same way that a lot of readers really don't like or take against when in fiction things have just been lifted directly from real life, or even worse, from other people's lives. And I want to sort of get into that in a minute, to talk about the sort of cat person backlash, and a more recent essay in the NY Times about kidney person. But, you know, we don't have to talk too much about that. I sort of wanted to get into your fiction because, yeah, I could sort of talk about memoir all day, but I've not actually read the book yet. I'm really excited to read it, The Crane Wife, a Memoir in Essays. I'm really, really looking forward to it. But you've also written 2 novels, and they're both, I would say, in their own ways about community, both human and non-human. They're about belonging. They're both set near the ocean in these very richly described environments, and they both quite prominently feature absent fathers, but that might just be something that I look out for. I was wondering if you could perhaps do a reading from your second most recent novel, Family of Origin.
Yeah, I would so love to. So I will read from the opening chapter. I'm going to read to you for about 7-ish minutes, and then we'll have at it. All right, so this is the very first chapter, The Landing. People came to watch Landing to forget things. They gave themselves over to its Gulf Coast bug, its boardwalk amble, its funnel cake smell, its open carry vodka, its fireworks every night, in order to forget, because they were on vacation. This was the summer people came to the Landing to forget their jobs, forget climate change, forget police brutality, forget opioids, forget refugees, forget their inboxes, forget white supremacists, forget tsunamis out of season, and forget Band-Aid smells. They were rescriptors of ancient fights and relitigators of the past. They were scab pickers and dead horse beaters and wallowers of the first order. The Greys had not seen each other in almost 3 years, but they would converge at Watch Landing because their father was dead, drowned off the coast of Leaps Island, an hour's boat ride south, and as much as they would like to forget Dr. Ian Gray, they could not. The first sign the Greys did not belong here was that on the bus bound for Watch Landing, Elsa was the only one not dressed for the beach. 2 girls in front of her, smelling of coconut oil, wore bikini bottoms and t-shirts and hugged collapsible beach chairs. Elsa wore green pants turned up at the cuffs and Teva sandals. Her legs itched hotly. A giant backpack rode in the seat next to her, and Elsa looped her arm around it like a conspirator. The bus turned onto the bridge to the peninsula. When she got to the Landing, there was still the matter of finding someone with a boat to take them to Leaps. Nolan, Elsa's brother, who was meeting her there, claimed this would not be difficult, but it didn't seem likely the island got many visitors because the people who lived there were all crazy. Elsa and Nolan's father, Dr. Ian Gray, had moved to Leeds after being humiliated at nearly every distinguished biology department on the West Coast and then losing a fellowship in Alabama. Ian's fall from grace had been going on for so long that his children thought he might never stop falling. But he had, 2 years ago, when he joined the reversalist movement and gone to live on Leaps Island for good. Leaps was owned by Mitchell Towns and was inhabited by 7 former scientists, researchers, and naturalists whom Towns had convinced of his theories and brought to live there free of charge. The scientists' work was dedicated to the world's smallest known sea duck, the undowny bufflehead, and the island was the species' only known nesting ground. The undowny bufflehead's existence comprised the sum total evidence of the reversalists' core belief, that evolution had begun to run backward. Elsa had learned all of this on the reversalist vague, though well-maintained webpage. According to a counter at the bottom of the site, she was not alone. More than 10,000 people had been interested enough in the reversalists' theories to scroll through their manifesto. Elsa puzzled over the reversalists' logo, the silhouette of a bearded man with a walking stick, his foot extended behind him as if taking a step back. A caption referred to the logo as the Darwin walking backward. It seemed unlikely to Elsa that her father had believed in any of this, and yet, by the time Ian Gray had drowned, his rumpled clothes found among pouches of seaweed in one of the island coves the past week, her father had been living with the reversalists for almost 2 years, which implied that despite 30 years at Stanford, Cal Poly, and Berkeley, Ian did believe that human progress had slowed and swung on its fulcrum. He believed that evolution had reversed its course, and he believed all of this because of some fucking ducks. The bus slowed to its final stop at the landing, and everyone got off. The pavement was cracked. The beach-going people scattered to the ramps over the dunes, to the liquor stores, to the snack shacks and t-shirt shops, and Elsa followed them. She was a woman whose sweat smelled of iron, and already Elsa was sweating. She hitched her thumbs in her pack straps. Her sandy hair was roped and piled on her head, and she wore a white tank top that did not cover her soft, curved midriff. Elsa's mother, Ingrid, was a milk-pale Scandinavian nurse with very few bad moods. Elsa had inherited her pallor and little else. There were many bars, because Watch Landing was the kind of boardwalk where people came to get drunk and stare at the ocean. No one was swimming. There were shrimp shacks and burger joints and a more formal restaurant with a long deck full of tables with white cloths. And of course, this is where Elsa found Nolan. There was a knot between Elsa's shoulders that twisted taut when she saw him. Nolan's mother, Keiko, a microbiome researcher from Kyoto, had been beautiful, and Nolan's sleek hair and open, inquisitive face were his mother's. The rest was all gray. Nolan's hair was to his shoulders, and he'd pushed it back with a pair of sunglasses. His long legs were jacked out from the low deck chair, and he leaned over the table as he sucked from the head cavity of a crawfish. A glass of pale beer was on the table, only a quarter drunk, beaded around the rim. He wore blue Oxford, open at the neck, and linen pants. In front of him was a bowl of carcasses. He looked so much like their father that Elsa paused. She had not seen Ian since he moved to Leaps, and Nolan on the boardwalk approximated a reincarnation. "This is morning?" Elsa called. Nolan looked up. He stood respectfully, like a subordinate officer. His eyes were reddish, and the bridge of his nose was dented from the glasses. She wanted to grab his elegant Adam's apple throat and squeeze. Weakness in Nolan had always driven her mad, ever since he was small and needily sucking up all of Ian's time. Elsa drew close. Nolan's fingers in the 4 o'clock light were oily and spotted with red. He held them out as she embraced him, so as not to stain her clothes. He kissed her cheek, and was it possible she felt the sting of cayenne? "We're not mourning yet, are we?" Nolan asked, as if he really wanted to know, as if he would not believe their father was dead until Elsa said. This pleased her, and yet, why should it be up to Elsa? They were 35 and 29 years old, too old for this. Elsa's life was a litany of troubles caused by the various absences of Ian Gray, and why should death be any different? Probably the ghost of Ian Gray was off plunging his big knuckled fingers into the layers of a duck's eiderdown and squinting at whatever inscrutable thing he found there, oblivious that his disappearance had inconvenienced anyone at all. Even this, even death, Ian would not make simple. "No mourning yet," Elsa told Nolan. She set her pack down as the waiter appeared and convinced her that a sweet red slurry called a zombie was just the thing for a day like today. Elsa agreed. She ordered fried oysters and 2 sides of fries because otherwise she knew Nolan would eat most of hers and she'd have to be angry at him because she was hungry and wanted to eat them all without sharing, and there was no time for them to be angry with each other now. I'll stop there.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. I love this book. It is so brilliant. It's beautifully written. It's incredibly funny. It's occasionally deliciously cruel. I get the sense that it was a lot of fun to write, and it seems like it was a lot of fun to research as well. Was it a sort of dream book to write?
You know, it was. I'd been working on another novel that had died on me, and it had died on me because I was trying to please people or imagine what would be a good thing to write or what people would like. And then I just, in the despair of having to chuck out like 200 pages of a book that had died, I was like, I'm just going to write about all the things I love that are weird, and I'm going to say all the weird things and write in all the weird ways, and I'm just going to delight myself and be cackling at my desk, and we'll just see what happens. And it's very, I don't know, I think that good things are made that way. I really think they are, when you just listen to your own strangest voices. And so it was a book that was a playful book for me and sort of an experimental book for me. And the structure of it was something that was kind of a puzzle I made for myself and kept myself amused by trying to make it work the way time functions in the novel. It was also a hard book to write in some ways. I sort of trapped myself into it because there's sort of these big existential questions in the book about like, can we have hope? And if so, how? Or should we all just chuck ourselves off the coast of the island like perhaps they think Ian Gray did? And so to sit down at the desk with those questions became quite dark sometimes, but it was balanced out by the fun of inventing these strange scientists and misanthropes.
Yeah, it is. That's really comes across is the playfulness of the book. And you know, how did you sort of go about creating that world? Because at the heart of it is this wacky science cult living on this sort of former commune island, and the duck, the smallest water duck, the undowny bufflehead, which is a great name. Doesn't exist as far as I know.
No, the bufflehead is real, but the undowny bufflehead is a contrivance.
And the scientists who believe that evolution is running backwards. You know, how did you go about constructing that world?
Do you know, it was almost a game I was playing with myself, because I actually think that if in another lifetime, another era, I was a person, I think I could quite easily be sucked into a cult or a commune. I think it would have been quite easy for someone to convince me to join. And I'm fascinated by stories of sort of intentional living communities and living experiments. All of this is so appealing to me on like one level. And then there's the other part of my brain, which is maybe like a Fran Lebowitz part of my brain that's like, this is stupid, don't do that, what are you talking about? And those two sides are always in tension. And so I think the idea was, if I am a person who sometimes, you know, and we all are probably, it's like you think about climate grief and climate change, or you think about sort of racial injustice, or you think about any of the things that I'm saying the people at the beginning of the book are trying to like forget or run away from, which of course you cannot. All of these huge problems. If a person was just like, I don't know what good work I can do to help anymore. I don't know how to be an ethical person in the world. I'm leaving. Everything's bad, and I will create a science to prove it is bad. Like, that's an exit strategy that I can almost imagine myself falling into. And so I created them to sort of like play around with this idea of, how would a person get there? What are the ways of despair and giving up that a person could do? And then how could I write about them in such a way to sort of write my way back to a sense of, but of course you can't give up. Of course you can't run away. Of course, just because you're hiding on an island doesn't mean these problems like don't exist just because you're not looking at them. And I think I needed to sort of write my way into the problem that I was having, and then write my way out of it too. And it turns out it takes a whole cast of characters to do that.
Yes, yeah, and you get the sort of backstories and how all these characters ended up in these places, you know, how they ended up in this place of kind of hopelessness. And one of the characters I think about quite often is the character of the sci-fi writer who's the most reclusive of the recluses, who's Remy. And he's sort of basically got writer's block because he's a sci-fi writer, but he cannot imagine a future for the human race. And he's trying to write his final book. And can you please just tell us about, what that final book contains and what the sort of future for life on Earth is?
Yeah, if there's anyone in this book, they're all me and none of them are me. But if anyone is extra me, perhaps it is Remy Senchiel. And he is writing this series of these sort of space explorers who are looking for a Goldilocks zone and another habitable planet for humans to live on. And one of the characters in the book, Elsa, is actually also sort of signing up for a mission to colonize Mars, which everyone but her seems to think is a joke. But Remy is writing about these people, and they keep going to all the different planets and sort of deciding why it's not a good home for humans. And the last book in the series, which his publisher is very keen to publish, is the return to Earth. And he can't imagine sort of a foreseeable way for Earth to exist for us again, or for us to save it. And it's that idea of the failure of imagination that I really wanted to think about. And so he sort of is there drafting and redrafting and writing this thing about extremophile microbes, the sort of way that some people say the Big Bang started, where they sort of combined and there was osmosis, and then there was a new organism which became a bigger, and it's that miracle of life. And the idea of like, will it ever happen again? And he's like, probably not. I'll just leave you there in this bleak place with microbes. For also the idea of like turning into your publisher this like 1,000-page book about microbes, never meeting, was something I really enjoyed laughing about at my desk. But I don't know, I teach a class on sci-fi here, and I teach them Afrofuturism, and I really love the ideas of writing as a way toward hope. If you can imagine things, perhaps we can get there. But we have to be able to imagine them first. And so for Remy, he can't even imagine his way to any sort of hope.
Yeah, no, I just loved the image of just the extremophile bacteria forming, blossoming, dying away for 1,000 years, and that is the future. But it sort of taps into a current of thought that is very prevalent at the moment. I mean, I keep seeing this sort of weird anti-human optimism where people are like, it's okay, life will be fine, just not human life. I mean, Richard Powers' recent novel, Bewilderment, I absolutely loved his last novel, but this one is so bleak, and it's kind of along those same lines. It's actually weird that he's sort of looking for Goldilocks zones on other planets, and then there's just no hope for life on this planet, and it is just that sort of like, okay, life will be fine, but our time is over, which is a weird sort of, it's like fatalism dressed up as optimism.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. I teach a class on the Booker Prize, actually, and so we just did that book in class last week, and so I had a table of 18-year-olds reading this book about sort of generational differences and climate grief and all of this, and I actually felt like Richard Powers and I were maybe sort of tapping into the same spooky currents of thought with thinking about going backwards and all of that. But in any event, it was really heartbreaking and meaningful to me to discuss that book with a table full of 18-year-olds, being like, well, but why is it the kids' job? Like, why are all the adults in this book just failing to do anything over and over again? And that was a part of the book that really spoke to them. But you're right, there is this thread of like, I think the boy at one point revises his mother's maxim, which was something like, may all creatures have well-being, or something like that, and then have safety and well-being, and he revises it to say, may all creatures be safe from us.
Yeah.
And that is such a devastating moment to be like, maybe the answer is extracting us from the equation, which is a question I was thinking about in Family of Origin too. But I like to think there are ways of like, I don't know, that book is very smart about different kinds of minds, sort of AI minds, animal minds, neurotypical and neurodivergent human minds. And like, if we're gonna get out of this mess, we're gonna need to think in all those ways and embrace all those ways of thinking. And that is the thing I've been holding on to as a tiny beacon of hope.
Yeah, there is hope. Maybe for the extremophile bacteria and the fungi which dwell in the craters of active volcanoes. I sort of wanted to go from the cosmic down to the personal, because in both of your books, there is this theme that joins them too of the sort of present absent father. Why did you choose that theme?
I don't know that I did it on purpose, but I think in a way it's almost like in a fairy tale, everyone's parents are dead. There's a way in which if the people who are meant to show you the way are absent, you're sort of in the muck yourself. And I think that so much of what I'm writing about often is that generational sense of that sense of this. I was raised by baby boomers, and I was that kid, and my bedroom was decorated like it was the 60s, and I was I was born at the wrong time. I'm reading this John Lennon bio, and I'm thinking about the war. I could have been thinking about things actually happening in my time, and now I hope I'm a person who does. But I was really sort of feeling growing up there was this sense of, you have shown me what to do and it's not working. And so we're going to have to figure this out ourselves. And that absent father kind of thing, I think for me stands in a lot for the generational knowledge is not being passed down, or it's not in whatever spirit it's being given. We can't use it. And so we sort of have to muddle along as if we're alone, as if we've been abandoned. And so we have to do it this way. So I think that might be part of it.
Yeah, interesting. I was sort of thinking, when I was thinking about this, I was thinking about, the difference between memoir and novel. And, with memoir, you're writing that event and your emotions that relate to that event. Whereas with fiction, you're responding to the events and emotions of your life in a very different and sometimes, kind of unconscious way. It's like the difference between a diary and a dream. They both say a lot about their creator, but, the latter is certainly more difficult to unpick. And, now sort of going to your first novel, did I get, and actually both of your novels, did you enter into them in a dreamlike way, and it was only afterwards that you had some clarity over the sort of, the animuses guiding you?
I think, first of all, I hope someday you give a talk or a class called The Difference Between a Diary and a Dream, because I'm signing up for it. I'm very interested in that, and I love the music of the phrase. The first book is so different. I was 23, and I was like, what is a novel? I've read 1,000 of them, but I don't know how to do this at all. And so I was sort of, on the one hand, learning to write a novel, and on the other hand, because it was the first thing I'd written, I felt this pressure that was everything I believe and care about and know must be in this book. And once it's sort of off, you're sort of relieved, and the next thing can be its own specific corner of whatever it is you want to do next. But for some reason, the first one felt very ego identity, folk music and kissing girls and saving small towns and the ocean and fishing culture and maybe sea shanties will save the world. And I really believed that. Maybe I still believe that. Some part of me still believes that. But it was all of this idealistic thinking and learning to write a book at once. So it was a really heavy-handed, if ecstatically, jubilantly passionate state of affairs. With Family of Origin, it was definitely more of a dreamy, I'm just going to my island. I just keep going to my island and writing about my island, and maybe someday I'll invite people to it. Who knows if anyone else wants to read it. So very different kinds of projects, I think.
No, they feel like very, very, very different books, but they both have these sort of very deep emotional insights into the characters, and that really, really ring true. I mean, in The Fromaways, there is this scene where one of your main characters, who's never known her father, throws herself into this pond full of snapping turtles in this desire to be rescued by this father that she's never known, which is so, people who are abandoned constantly want to be rescued. It's this sort of very, very true feeling thing. And, similarly, Family of Origin, that you really sort of feel the anger towards the father, and it's all very, very, very true. And I was just wondering, how do you go about achieving those insights and sort of getting this psychological veracity on the page?
I think they're feelings that I feel quite keenly in a lot of different ways. I think there are many different times and relationships in my life, like in all sorts of relationships, familial, romantic, friendship, where, do you know what a friend said to me? I had a hard time, and no one had come to bail me out. And it wasn't because I don't have good friends. I have very, very good friends. And I had sort of said, I decided to be squeaky wheel. And I said to my friend, I was like, do you know, that was really hard. And I wish y'all had shown up for me and like helped me out. And they're like, oh, you just seemed fine. And you were cracking jokes. You seemed quite stoic. And so we assumed you were fine. And I was like, oh. And it's like this sense of like, what do I have to do? How squeaky must I be? And this is such a pity party, right? But this is the mental, this is how you get into this character set, is on the inside. I'm like, what do I have to do to get you to understand that I would like someone to come and like make me a cup of tea and give me a hug, or like come and do the thing? Do I have to throw myself into a whole pond of snapping turtles to be like, I'm drowning? I'm drowning. Will you help me now? And it's so ridiculous, and it's so maudlin, and it's like laughing at like Quinn is ridiculous in that scene, the woman who throws herself into the pond. She's totally ridiculous, and yet the feeling is so real. It's like, I need you to come get me. I have put myself in a pit. I put on a little play, and now you will come get me because you have to. And like I couldn't relate to it more, honestly.
And, you know, in your story, you know, the absent father does, you know, and they have a, well, semi, you know, the ending of the book is pretty brutal, but you know, they have a sort of semi-happy ending together. We've got some questions coming in from the audience. Anyone who has a question, please get them in now, because we're sort of drawing to approaching the end of this. We've got some questions about your practice, really. Helen Compson says, hi, have you always kept a notebook? And if so, how important is it in helping to build your work? Yes, are you sort of spying on people at cafes? And yeah.
I write down, I make my students keep notebooks. That's the first thing I do when we have the first day of creative writing classes. I'm like, you have to create some sort of a way, whether it's a notes app on your phone or a stack of napkins in your pocket or a lovely notebook. I absolutely believe in having a notebook. And I just write down the strangest little snatches of things, just like things people say, books people tell me to read, memories that come up to me. I've been doing a lot lately for the nonfiction. I just take notes on like places and spaces I've been in. There's no narrative there at all. It's just observational. Like, this is what this beach smelled like, and what the tide was like, and the sort of people who were there, and the mood of it, and just all of those details, because those are the things that escape you later, I think, and are harder to pull back. So yes, I love, and I have like fancy notebooks, and I have garbage notebooks. I have one that's specifically for like dreams and for gratitude journaling. I have one that's just for writing. I don't know, Charlie, do you keep a notebook?
I keep a lot of different files on my computer where I write down different things. But it's funny what you sort of, sometimes you have a very intense experience and you think, okay, and then you get home and you just got nothing. You know, it's only a week later or a month later you can actually sort of scroll things down. But I have a sort of theory that, I mean, obviously, you know, one of the most important things about writing is being able to noticing small details. And I've got a few theories about this. One, that writers are not as completely useless in the post-apocalypse as we think we'd be, because actually, if you can notice like details, then maybe you'll be really good at like finding berries and mushrooms. And like, I think maybe writers would be really good hunter-gatherers, because you got to notice those small details. But I also think, particularly in relation to birds, you know, you have, you know, I get the sense from your work, spent a fair amount of time, you know, watching animals and watching birds. And I think the attention to detail and the internal stillness that you need to do that does help make a good writer. Is that an important part of your practice and your noticing practices, watching animals?
Thank you so much what you're saying, not just that we'll survive in the apocalypse, but I think it's a way of being in the world that's so, I think it's important to sort of, I don't know, at least for me, it's important to me for my happiness is to be a person who is noticing things and is noticing people around me and noticing their moods and how they're acting, and especially noticing in nature. I just went on a couple of big hikes. We were off for fall break and I went on some big hikes, and I am the person who's constantly like stopping the person I'm hiking with, being like, but look at that, like, look at this moss, look at this, what is this, what is happening? There are ladybugs all over this stuff. And like, you have to. And I just feel like it's a way of being in the world that makes me feel like connected and happy. I really love, Jenny Odell has this book called How to Do Nothing. And she talks a lot about being in spaces and birding and just having awareness. And I think for me, that's just the crux of being a happy person in the world. But of course, writers must do it too. And I think so often my students, when I give them this first week, this assignment that they have to keep their notebook and they have to write down things they notice, the first thing they notice is that everyone else is not noticing and that everyone else is looking at their phones. And I think that's really interesting too.
Interesting. We've got a couple more questions. I thought we'd get through them because we're drawing ever closer. What's something you always try to do while writing, and how did you figure out what you want to do in life? Asks Stephanie Serrario.
Oh my goodness, that last part's a big one. Something I always do while writing is to try to put my phone away, because I find that it's always just at the moment where my brain is about to figure something out or like enter into a more dreamy kind of productive writing state that my brain's like, ow, what? I'm bored, I'm mad, let me see what's on Instagram. And so I have to put it away. And I think just coming to the page and just starting to write words and not trying to tell myself in my head, like, oh, I'm going to write this today, or I'm going to do this. Like, no, just by the grace of God, some words will go on the page. Just start there and see what happens. I don't know how to answer what I do. I know what I'm going to be when I grow up. Even now, probably not. Probably I'm going to be noticing things in our apocalyptic commune. I can't wait. That's what I'm going to do in life, and I don't know how I know it.
That seems like a good place to draw things to a close. Thank you so much for agreeing to talk with me, and I hope everyone enjoyed it. I would encourage everyone watching, if they haven't already, to, well, first pre-order The Crane Wife, a memoir and essays, and then work your way through CJ's back catalogue, especially this one. This one is very, very wickedly funny. And I so agree with you about, you really have to be playful and be creative. If that's the sort of one takeaway, it's, be more playful and creative and curious, and notice the birds and mushrooms, and write it all down.
Yeah, all of that. Oh, it's such a pleasure to be people who have read each other, and now to actually speak not on the pages is a great joy, and thank you for inviting me.
That's lovely. Thank you for coming. I look forward to your event when you have the role of interrogator.